In their official review for this exact same album, blabbermouth.net writes, "The songs are nearly all of such quality and so emotionally fitting for these turbulent times that even sneering cynics might struggle to keep the tears in." Well, I had absolutely no problem whatsoever holding these tears in, which means one of two things. Either I'm a special kind of heartless, sneering, cynical assholery that blabbermouth.net has yet to meet face to face, or maybe they're full of shit, maybe they're over-exaggerating. I don't know. If I were a gambling man, I'd feel pretty uncomfortable right now, because Blabbermouth being full of shit sounds reasonable, but a channel called the Metal Meltdown being a heartless, cynical asshole, ooh, that seems like a safe bet. You know? I don't blame y'all for betting against me in this particular scenario, alright? Songs of Loss and Separation is the sophomore studio album and the first major release in nearly 10 years from Times of Grace, a collaboration between both Jesse Leach and Adam D of Killswitch Engage fame. A band so monumentally iconic and influential to the landscape of not just American metalcore, but heavy metal in the past 20 years that I don't really feel like I need to go into detail explaining who the fuck they are. There's a good chance, if you've been involved in this genre in any capacity for the past 2 decades, you've already heard their names before and thus are already aware as to what they're capable of. Now, unfortunately, I haven't really been a massive fan of the last few Killswitch Engage records, which, in my opinion, have ranged from being pretty decent to competent but ultimately forgettable. I'm also not really familiar with previous material from Times of Grace. So not only am I entering Songs of Loss and Separation with a genuine lack of enthusiasm, but I'm also going in with a genuine lack of knowledge and insight and experience. But somewhat ironically, it's for these exact same reasons that I was initially impressed by what I was hearing out of Songs of Loss and Separation, as the material sees Jesse and Adam straying away from the blazing, if perhaps derivative melodic metalcore of recent Killswitch Engage, and opting for a sound a little bit more somber, a little bit more introspective and mellow and evocative, more in line with late 90s, early 2000s alternative metal and post-grunge balladry. Throughout this record, I'm constantly reminded of bands like Stone Sour, Seven Dust, A Perfect Circle. There are also some subtle influences from the world of post-rock and, yes, as expected, metalcore as well. The track Rescue in particular, for better or for worse, does genuinely feel like something I could expect to hear on a recent Killswitch Engage record. The track Medusa as well shows Times of Grace looking to other heavy subgenres for inspiration and influence, with some very swampy, sludgy guitar work and sound effects, very reminiscent of some modern Alice in Chains or even Black Label Society to an extent. And then there's Jesse, who just sounds straight up fucking fantastic across this whole thing. I'd make the argument that this is probably one of his best vocal performances on any record in a long time. Though that's where my praise comes to an end, because as passionate and well-crafted as so much of this is, it's just not really all that interesting. So much of this material, despite its more progressive ambitions and flourishes, is ultimately very simplistic, to the point where I could probably finish this review right now by simply saying, hey, what if Jesse Leach sang for Stained or Stone Sour? Wouldn't that be neat? Because, I mean, that's pretty much what's happening here. The material is very mopey, very sappy, very melodramatic, a lot of lyrics about redemption and perseverance and losing faith, or in some cases keeping faith. I mean, there's a very raw, barren honesty to this that I can appreciate, one accentuated by Jesse's incredible vocals, but ultimately there's no information being relayed to me that I haven't heard from any other kind of alt-metal post-grunge record before, or even that I haven't heard from a Killswitch Engage record before. In fact, the music is often so generic and so derivative that throughout the album you're pretty much saying, this sounds like this, and this sounds like this, instead of saying, this sounds like maybe Times of Grace. In the case of The Burden of Belief, for instance, if you told me that this was just an old stone sour acoustic ballad that was reworked by Times of Grace, I'd fucking believe you. Same goes for the track Cold, which honestly sounds like the kind of one-dimensional schlock I could expect to hear on a really soft Five-Finger Death Punch number. Though the worst offender is definitely Bleed Me, which at best sounds like an overblown homage to Nirvana's Something in the Way, and at worst is dangerously close to plagiarizing it. I'm also not a big fan of how faith and spirituality are represented lyrically on the album, as it can often feel as though Jesse Leach is just preaching to you like some kind of pastor trying to give a motivational speech in his Sunday sermon. The track Far From Heavenless in particular is completely devoid of subtlety and restraint. This is the musical equivalent to somebody standing at a crowded intersection and just kind of rambling about the glory and love of God. And the killer is, we haven't even gotten to the worst track on the album, Currents, a viciously unappealing number with monotonous riffs and some terrible post-rock vocal harmonies. The very final minute in particular of this song has to be the most aggravating and repetitive display of ham-fisted riffery I've seen on any kind of rock album in 2021. Ultimately, I'd give this a 2 out of 5. There's a lot I admire about the design of this record. There's a lot I'd admire about the performances, the production, the overall passion, but the album's execution leaves much to be desired. It ultimately lacks depth, subtlety, ambition, and creativity. It lacks a reason to stay invested after multiple listens, and even after the halfway point as tracks begin to blur together into one big, sappy, overdramatic alt-metal post-grunge mess. Maybe if this came out in 2002, I'd be feeling different because I wouldn't have heard this exact same style done to death by now, but the fact of the matter is, I have, and Times of Grace just aren't doing enough new or interesting things to reinvigorate this sound. Considering the album's lyrical themes and concepts, and considering the fact that our collective mental psyche is pretty fragile right now for a multitude of reasons I should not have to fucking explain, there is a real possibility that this will resonate with some people, and I can relate, don't get me wrong. I have definitely had some very emotional reactions over the past year and a half to music from Svalbard, Panopticon, Sepetus, Withered, and a few more. This is just not one of those albums for me. Like I said, it ultimately just lacks the depth, the subtlety, the ambition, the creativity that I search for, that I crave in emotionally driven music like this. It's just not interesting enough. The music isn't progressive enough. It's not heavy enough. It's not a lot of things that I personally look for. I kind of feel like I've said everything I need to say about this album, so why don't we just wrap this up here? 2 out of 5, despite its best intentions and efforts, it's ultimately just kind of a poor record, for me at least. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? And thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown e-fucking immediately. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.